Alrighty. All right. Well, then let's go ahead and get started. I'm gonna share my screen. There. All right. So today we're going to talk about growing our coding career. Uh, One moment. So this session will be recorded and will be made available afterwards in an email. If you signed up for the webinar through our website, you should get an email later today. Once our recording's ready, I'll send that out with all the links seen in today's presentation, and there are a lot of them. But if you haven't, if you're watching this on YouTube, YouTube will have a link to sign up for the thank you email after the fact. So once that recording is made available, I'll update the YouTube for signing up for that email as well. So rest assured, this month we are streaming this to our YouTube channel in addition to recording it. And by December, we will be just streaming on YouTube and off of Zoom. So just so you're aware of the changes that are coming. Okay, so in our past few webinars, we've talked about architecture, we've talked about different patterns. Coming up, we have more patterns. But what about the human part of it? What about the how can we be better coders? And usually I take things on like the human side of user experience and thinking like that. But today I want to talk about the code because at the end of the day, I love coding and I need to get better with it over time. All of us do. So heads up, there are a lot of links, a lot of stories, a lot of adventures. Sign up for the thank you email because I'm not going to have the links shown on here, but we'll talk about the different sites. So my question to you is, how do you learn? What are the ways for you to learn? So I think about my career. So I've been doing this for over 20, almost 25 years, a little bit over that. But how do I learn? A lot of experience. But there are other ways we learn too. So maybe you read blogs. We write blogs here at Nimble Pros, so you'll see some of the stuff that we've been writing about. But maybe I read them as well. Reading is good for like when I just want to see what's coming up. This is how I usually look at it. So I'll look at like, well, what's coming up in .NET 9, which I know is coming in November, so I should probably brush up on that. So that's what I'm looking at there. But what other blogs are you looking at? We use ardalis.com because Steve does a lot of blogging in the .NET space as well. But are there other blogs that you like?
Nothing's springing to mind,
Okay,
but I do check that one out when I get the email. So
very cool. Yeah, and that's the other thing is how do you read your blogs? Like I used to read them in a RSS reader way back when. I think that what was that Feedly, but it's no longer around. And so how do we do this? Well, I know some people use RSS readers, but with the Nimble Pros blog, I know that yes, we have RSS, but not everybody uses an RSS reader. And so I made sure that we added the feature where you could subscribe to the blog and get the blog post in your email as well. But sometimes it's one of those, do you actually remember to go to the blog websites to see if they've updated? Or do you find other ways to stay up on them? What about books? I've been reading books a long time. As I turn around and look at the bookshelf behind me, I see the stuff from days of yore as well. So like Perl and CGI programming, PHP, but I also see my Visual Basic 6 book back there. But modern programming, these are some of the books we're reading. So we're reading design patterns. The Head First series from O'Reilly is awesome. If you don't know about the website Humble Bundle, so it's humblebundle.com. They will do deals on books, and sometimes you'll see a deal on tech books. So like 25 O'Reilly books for $25. Money goes toward charity, but then it allows you to get these books at a decent cost, and they're DRM free too. So I have a Remarkable 2 that I read a lot of my books on because I can also highlight and annotate as I'm reading. It works really well. So Humble Bundle will do, sometimes it's an O'Reilly bundle or a pack bundle. Sometimes it's just a bundle on a topic. So definitely worth checking out. But these are some of the ones when I think of like, how do I get better in my coding skills? What I want to learn more of? Well, design patterns, of course. Unit testing, we love testing here in general. So this is one of the books we recommend to people just getting into unit testing. And of course, being a .NET shop, we have some of Steve's books here as well. I have a whole list of books that I could recommend that I'll probably do in a separate blog post just because blogging for coders, books for coders are very catchy. Now, my next question then is, what about do you watch videos?
I do.
Do you have a favorite channel that you like to watch?
I've got Steve's, um, Nick Chapsis, I believe.
Yeah, Nick Chapsis.
Um, I subscribe to Carl Franklin's got
Hmm.
one. He was doing a bunch of Blazer Train stuff for a while. Now he's doing the puzzles with what's his Fritz? I can't
Oh,
remember
with
his.
Jeff Fritz.
Yeah,
Yeah.
those are the majority of the coding ones that I can think of at the moment.
Do you watch any coding streams on Twitch?
I do not know.
So some of the things that I know from talking with other people and the stuff I've done is when it comes to learning and watching videos, some people prefer watching videos such as these that I have up at the top. So like Steve's channel or Dallas and the on.net's live series. Those are great. Either catch them if he's live streaming, catch it live streaming. Otherwise, just catch the videos after the fact. This bottom right one, so the Nimble Pros YouTube channel. Today we're actually live streaming. I expect to do more live streaming, hopefully into the new year. But then Pirate Software. I have to mention Pirate Software because it's one of the Twitch streams that I do follow. And the reason why I like that is because of his shorts. And the way I explain Pirate Software to people is he's like the Mr. Rogers to game development and the Mr. Rogers to developers in general. Kind of like how Hanselman is a Mr. Rogers like character for us as well. They're just genuinely nice people who are here to help support the community and help people to grow. So I recommend that. C Sharp Fritz is another one. So you were seeing him on Carl Franklin's channel, but C Sharp Fritz also will stream on Twitch.
I knew he streamed on Twitch. I just haven't. I don't think I've ever even typed in the URL into an address bar before. So
Yeah, it was weird because for some of us, we come from the gaming world, so we're like Twitch, we're watching people play various video games. Watching one of my teammates who is a speedrunner for Zelda games. So we're used to seeing that for gaming, but there's a lot more coding streams happening out there too.
okay.
What about, do you take any courses?
I try to at my company. My boss, manager, whatever,
Hmm.
has a Pluralsight subscription that we can use.
Yeah.
I've heard of Dome Train, but I haven't taken any courses from Dome Train. And
Yeah, so
then I assume this is considered a course from Nimble Pros. So,
so Nimble Pros, we just are launching Nimble Pros Academy, and we launched our first course, which is clean architecture. And then we have a few more courses coming up. Hopefully, I'll have those out before the end of the year. Currently working on some stuff with regards to identity. But then we have a bunch of other things coming down the line as well. Now, Dome Train probably sounds familiar to you because you did mention that you watched Nick Chapsis's videos, and Nick Chapsis is the one behind Dome Train.
yeah, and I think Steve's got a video or two with him too.
Yeah, he has a couple courses out there for modular monoliths, which are fantastic. It was one of those that, so for those who are watching the recording or after the fact as well, the Dome Train one is where you're seeing a lot of newer .NET courses coming out. Pluralsight, of course, has been around for quite a while. edX, Coursera, Udemy, those have been around a very long time. And then Free Code Camp, I always have to put out there to let people know that you don't always have to pay for your courses. There are some free learning resources out there because I know coming from the background I did, we didn't have a lot growing up, so I would take advantage of going to the library and courses at the library. Anything free was how I got ahead for quite a long time. So have to get a nod to the Free Code Camp crew as well. What about, do you go to conferences at all or attend any workshops?
Yeah, I somewhat struggle to find local ones and
Okay.
or virtual ones that I guess look appealing, but I've done a couple NDC ones.
Hmm.
Prairie Code is like a Midwest one. I think they do Nebraska. They didn't get any sponsorship this year for Iowa, which is where I'm from, so
Oof.
they didn't have
Okay.
one in Iowa. Um, I do the .NET Conf in November.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, those are the main ones.
Yeah,
So,
that's you're hitting on some pretty key ones too, because like the Prairie Dove Comp Series is a great group. NDC is huge in their name. Tekorama is
mhm.
another one of those. Devox, Code Motion, those are some of the bigger ones. And then when we're here in the States with the locals, so you mentioned that there's like Nebraska Code. There is Connectaha, that's out that way. DevUp, which is out in St. Louis. I was just out there in August. Right now, Tech Bash is happening as we speak. They're at Pocono Manor in Pennsylvania. It's part of the Kalahari conferences. So there's Code Mash, which is the original of the Kalahari conferences. That happens at the beginning of January in Sandusky, Ohio. And then later in January is the that conference Round Rock edition in Round Rock, Texas. And then later in the year is that conference Wisconsin Dells, which is where that conference initially happened. So in that conference, that's the website is that.us. So just so you're aware that when I say that conference, I'm not referring to a generic one. That's its actual name is that.
Okay.
But they're all community run events. We also have here in the Ohio area, we've got Stir Trek, which happens usually beginning of May, which is another great, fantastic community run event happens in a theater. Usually you get your own private viewing of a movie that happens that day.
Oh,
But these conferences like CodeMash and uh, that conference and Tech Bash, for example, the bigger conferences, they do have these workshops, or usually you see them as like pre-day conferences. And it's like 2 days. Some of the conferences, workshops are half days and some are full. And so one of the things I like to promote with these kind of events is go to a workshop and learn something, whether it's something for work or learn something for fun. In this particular one here, this is a older story, but this is from Strange Loop 2013, and they had some workshops and they had one on Raspberry Pis. And we have some Raspberry Pis here at home. As long as I'm doing loose connections, I'm fine. If we're doing soldering, you don't want me doing your soldering. So, but I took that as an opportunity to learn something that's usually not in my day-to-day thing, but it still
mhm.
allowed me to learn how do I code for the Pis. If I remember right, that was either Java or Python, but yeah. And then the story for the one in the upper right is so Kids Mash is a kids track within Code Mash, and we teach kids all sorts of coding techniques as well. And this is one of the bots that they were playing with.
Cool.
Yeah. What about do you do tutorials online?
Yeah, if I'm working on something personal, normally I'll see what I can find that aligns with what I'm doing. Um, but yeah, I guess for work, I don't know if I ever really see much. I might pick out something within a tutorial that aligns with what I'm doing for work and
Hmm.
just use that to my benefit. Maybe not do the whole thing, but yeah,
Yep.
a little bit.
Yeah, and that picking and choosing parts of the tutorial to focus on just because you only need that little piece, I do that often. I
Yeah.
still remember I found it was an Azure Key Vault tutorial, and I was going through how you work with calling Azure Key Vault from other resources, and they had that default Azure credential in it, and I was just like, okay, hold up, what's going on here? Which has led to a presentation I do at conferences, but it was cool to just go through the tutorial and see things and then learn about something as I was going through it. Like, I didn't see this one coming. What is default Azure credential? Oh, it makes it easier for me to have resources talk to each other. Oh, look, I don't have to remember a password between them. So I find going through tutorials is great when you have a particular thing in mind that you're trying to accomplish.
Yeah.
Sometimes though I find that I have to be explicit in what I'm searching for too. So
Mm.
let's say that I'm working on ASP.NET identity with JOT tokens, for example. Okay, now I have to do a search for ASP.NET identity JOT tokens examples or quick start or tutorial. Like I have to put those words in my search result or in my search so that I
Mm.
get exactly what I want. Because if I leave out quick start or if I leave out tutorial, then I'm probably going to get the reference documents. And that's one
Yeah.
of those where it shows you like the method that you're calling plus each of the different parameters. And you're like, this is not what I want. I just want I want an example. I want to walk me
Mm.
through how I use this. I don't care so much about the reference documentation. So when you're learning online and you're going through online tutorials and you're like, how do I find a tutorial about this? Make sure you include the words like guide or quick start or tutorial as part of your search. That way you're getting closer to what you're trying to work through.
Makes sense.
I see we have some friends over on YouTube. Hello and welcome. We're talking through various resources to get better with your coding skills. So it all goes back to, so we talked about blogs, we talked about videos, we talked about how do you grow in general? Well, the thing is that we can read books and we can listen to videos and watch videos. We could even listen to podcasts. Some people find podcasts are great for learning more about coding. For me, I have a disconnect because I kind of want to see the code. I want to play with the code, and hearing it is just not enough. But different people have different ways of taking in things. So read, watch, and listen. But most importantly, the best way we do better in our coding is by practicing. And I have a story to share. So you all know I work for Nimble Pros, I work for Steve. Steve is an awesome boss, by the way, but we were talking about some of the things that we're dealing with content creation wise. And you're probably wondering, what does this have to do with code? Well, let me tell you the story. So he mentioned this book called Art and Fear. And with Art and Fear, there's a story about a teacher who divides a class into two groups. It's a ceramics teacher, and they were going to have to make pots. One group was graded solely on the number of pots that they made. The other was graded on the quality of a single pot. So that group that was graded on the quality of a single pot, they were just taking notes and getting into these things. But what happened is that the quantity group, so the ones who made more pots, actually did better because they learned from their mistakes and improved from that repetition. Whereas the group that fixated on just that one pot didn't gain as much practical experience. So we have to practice. We have to ship more pots. Same thing with code. We have to be able to practice. Sometimes the code that we write is going to be gross. It's going to be like, oh God, why did I do this? But you have to learn. And if you hit that point of, oh, this is gross, now that you recognize your code is gross, now you can refactor it. Now you can apply the things that you're learning. So maybe you have code that's all melded together in funky ways. You can then refactor it into different design patterns and make it more manageable. Another comment that we get from YouTube. Thanks, Emery. So one of the questions about how do you learn and how do you practice, Emery mentioned that they jump into GitHub repos sometimes. We're going to be talking about GitHub repos here in a little bit because it is coming close to October and we have a celebration to talk about. All right, so ship more pots, get a lot of that practice, get that coding in your fingertips. But the question is, how do you practice? So Emery mentioned jumping into GitHub repos sometimes. That helps. Create personal projects. Now, when it comes to creating a personal project and you don't know where to start, I'm going to say think of the things that are probably around you, maybe sitting on your desk right now, maybe things that you use often, things like a calculator app. A tip calculator is something I used to use with students all the time because how many people go out to eat and then have to calculate a tip? So just being able to get the logic. Or an address book. I still have to tell the story of the address book. So I was learning Visual Basic long time ago. And we're talking like Visual Basic 3 days. And I was just like, okay, this is pretty cool to play around with. I should create an application. And so I created an address book. And this was way back in the days of, so that's early 2000s. and a website called No Nags where you could put up freeware. And so I put out a book on my address book, and Visual Basic is a thing. I look back on it now like I did what and why, and oh God, I don't want to see the code today, but I did it. I created a personal project because I wanted to play with the language. To-do lists are another thing that people do for their first, I want to test my code and see how it works. When you get into things like SignalR, then yeah, chatting kind of helps as well. So creating a chat app with something like that. Movie reviews is a good one. There may be some other ideas as well, just talking with friends and you're like, oh, I should probably consider this idea for an app and maybe I'll program it. Things like maybe flashcard apps or expense trackers or weather apps. Flashcard apps reminds me of so I have a brother who's 8 years younger than me. And when he was little, I was playing around with code and I created a flashcard app for him. And it was cool to see him learning these things, but it was even better to see, oh, look, my code actually solved a problem. What's Emery saying? Yeah, personal projects and copycat projects are definitely great ways to practice and learn new stuff. Oh, have you heard about a code kata?
I have, but I haven't attempted one yet.
Okay, how did you hear about code katas?
Probably from something on .NET Rocks podcast.
Probably .NET Rocks may have mentioned it. Maybe Steve Smith was on there and mentioned it because Steve deals with that a lot. We do code katas here with our teammates. We do code katas in workshops at conferences. I got to give it a shout out to Brendan Enrick, who's my co-presenter. I worked with him at Tech Bash last year. He's like, hey, I want to do a testing workshop. Do you want to be my co-presenter? I was like, sure. And so we led to some code katas, which is fantastic. It's a great way to test your skills. So for those not familiar with the term kata, think of the word form. So kata is a Japanese word for form, or it's a way of doing something. And when it comes to businesses, it's used for learning, practicing, and implementing methods and processes and skills. And so a code kata allows you to learn your skills and then put them into practice and testing them. Now, there are different katas out there and different types of katas. Steve's kata catalog will be in the links in that thank you email. I do like that one, but there's so much more than just the kata catalog. So I'm going to break it down in some of the different types that are out there, as well as some other resources too. So the first one I'm going to talk about is the algorithmic katas. So those are, you're dealing with algorithms and data structures. Now, there's going to be links to sites sometimes that are just their icons or their lead images, but rest assured in that thank you email, you'll have the full URLs. So you'll hear about LeetCode and HackerRank and then Code Wars. These have different ways for you to work on things like sorts, searching algorithms, dynamic problems for programming, things like that. So that's where those shine, is they have those. These sites will come back again because they also help in other katas as well. And then some of them also have competitions too. Right, refactoring katas. So the Gilded Rose is probably one of my favorite ones, and that's just because of the World of Warcraft references I used to play. So I definitely relate to it. But when it comes to refactoring, think of it as you've just inherited a code base and now you look at it and go, oh, this could be done so much better. How are you going to refactor it? So the refactoring katas give you the ability to take existing code and refactor it into hopefully something a little bit nicer. So Ardalis's kata catalog has some of these. So I know Gilded Rose is on there. FizzBuzz is probably on there. But then Emily Batch, I think I might be getting her name correctly this time. She's got a lot of repos where she's got a lot of different code bases and different languages for getting started with these. I love her repos because of how many different languages she has in there as starting code. But you can see that there's different refactoring katas. So the Parrot one, Gilded Rose, Supermarket Receipt, Tennis, Theatrical Players, these are all situations that you can put yourself into and understand right away so that you can go now and look at the code and go, all right, what's it's really doing? Let's refactor it. Let's pull the method out. Okay, maybe we need to actually create a class for this, things like that. But it helps you to understand the code And it allows you to develop your refactoring skills a bit better, which is important as the coding side of it, understanding how you go from gross code to cleaner code. It gets better with practice. And that's actually next month's webinar. We're doing some common patterns that you're going to see and how you refactor them. All right, test-driven development katas. So I call, in this case, our Dallas's kata catalog because there's string calculator and bowling game. Brendan and I have done string calculator before. There's one called Roman numerals, which is also another good one. But what you do is you encourage them to write tests first. So you write the test first, then you write only the code to make that test pass. Now, what was nice with this one when Brendan and I ran the workshop is that he and I have a history of giving each other a lot of just picking on each other because that's what we do. And so we will put tests on there and it'll be something that people are like, whoa, you're doing what? But this is why we do these katas, because not everybody thinks the same way. And sometimes you have to see a test that'll take you outside of your norm and go, well, wait, how did you get there? So katas, think of them this way. They allow you to practice your code. They also allow you to practice different patterns or behaviors. So test-driven development, writing tests first and then making only the code to make it pass and that's it. That gets you practice in TDD and building that test first mindset. Now, code golf. Have you heard of code golf before?
No.
So
I think
the
I've heard
first,
of regex golf.
this is probably going to be something similar, where you're trying to get very concise code and the fewest number of characters or lines as possible.
Hmm.
I've seen it where basically if you obfuscate the code and minify the code, it'll get you close. But the readability of code in code golf, that goes down. That just goes down in dumpster. It's usually not readable, but it solves a problem in the smallest code footprint. Um, this allows you to think cleverly. I normally would steer people away from that, but at the same time, it's a different mindset. It allows you to kind of go, okay, how do I get this more concise? No more concise, no more concise. So it forces you to go down that path. Summing it in this, like they point out, fewest number of characters or lines. When you get down to the characters, that's where your readability really goes down. And that's why I say that's when using something like a minifier helps, an obfuscator helps, because that's what those tools are built for. Now, language specific katas. So when you want to focus on learning a particular language, this is where these come into play. And so HackerRank, Exorcism, and CodingBat each have different sections. CodingBat is Java and Python. Exorcism and HackerRank have other languages as well. But this allows you to get that language specific in there. I have a slide coming up here after the katas that'll show you another site that also has a lot of languages and examples that I'm excited to talk about too. All right, math and logic katas. So this is the whole, you need math in order to do computer science? Well, not necessarily, but if you want to sharpen your math skills, this would be the way to do it. Project Euler, so that's how it's pronounced. It's not Euler, it's actually pronounced Euler. This has been around a very long time, but it's great for giving you the little nuggets of, okay, I need to test this code. And what does this logic maybe look like? So you're going to see things like the Fibonacci sequences, the combinatorials, the prime numbers, the classic math problems are going to be there. Code and Game also does. Code and Game, I know a bunch of my teammates love Code and Game and the competitions and things like that. So I hear good things about it. I personally will spread the word when my teammates are talking good about it, but I have not looked at it because gamifying it is not for me. But I do have more links on that as well here too. All right, database katas. So usually you hear katas and you think, oh, okay, I'm going to practice my Java, I'm going to practice my C# or my Python, my PHP, my Ruby, my Perl, whatever language you're working with. You're like, I need to practice it. But how often do you think about, oh, I should practice my database queries too? Because sometimes we forget that our database languages are still languages and that we still need to practice them. LeetCode does have a SQL track. So SQL Zoo is also another way of learning database syntax. and getting those muscle memory built. So making efficient SQL queries, normalizing databases, optimizing for performance. Some of these, so SQL Zoo does a good job of explaining what the queries are and how to learn from them. That's why I mentioned SQL Zoo in there. Now, functional programming, are any of you working with functional programming today?
I am not.
Okay. Emery, what about you? There's a slight delay between our Zoom and YouTube, but I know I have a teammate, Kyle, talks about functional programming and F sharp. He's blogged about it in our blog before. I have a couple other friends in the space who are also about F sharp and using C sharp, and C sharp can also be used for functional programming, which is, when you think of it, you think maybe, well, wow, C sharp, I'm used to traditional object oriented. But yeah, you can take a fundamental paradigm, a functional paradigm to it as well. But what's nice with these katas when you go functional is that you get to the point where you have things like MapReduce functions. Everything boils down to functions and nested functions and recursion. And so understanding how these work, functional programming katas will allow you to practice that. As someone who has done the functional mindset and who has done the object-oriented mindset and the procedural and a few of the others, switching between the different paradigms can be a bit tricky. And so for people who are just getting started, if you don't understand the paradigm, like functional programming, you need to learn more about that first before jumping into the katas, because you need to understand what you're trying to practice. So you need to understand, like with functional, is you have these collections, these outputs, and then they reduce or they map or they apply, or they, like, you're applying into collections, and then you're also navigating within functions and functions within functions. And sometimes you're calling itself, that's the recursion part. So you have to understand those concepts before you can start building the muscle memory to write, to understand those concepts. All right, CodeCrafters.io. So I got to talk about CodeCrafters.io, thanks to my teammate Coop. So Coop was one of those where he's like, hey, I saw this website and I checked it out. And I'm like, okay, how does this differ from all the other sites that are out there? And when I saw their challenges, that was what really stood out to me. So you can learn about these different tools that we use. So how do you make your own grep? How do you build your own torrent site? How do you build your own Redis? So these are tools that we use as developers probably every day in one form or another. We may use some on side projects and not daily. For me, that's the SQLite. But you can learn how to build these and sharpening your existing languages, or you can sometimes do these in other languages as well. Now, what I like about these is that they talk about, okay, you want to build your own Git? Let's look at what is Git? And then they talk through, okay, well, what's going on here from under the covers logically? What does this look like? Okay, now let's make the code happen. And it breaks it down into what they call stages. So for each stage, they'll walk you through, like, okay, first things first, let's talk about Git. Okay, if you were to Git init a project, what does that do? Oh, you have to create a Git folder, the .git folder. Okay, well, write the code to make that happen. And it walks through all these other steps. Some of them are smaller, so build your own Git, there's 7 stages. But build your own Redis is 55 stages, so that's not so small. But it allows you to learn about how do these tools that we use daily, but might not think about how they work under the covers. This allows you to see that and to practice your coding. And then the other part I like about Code Crafters is this part here. So you have the language tracks and you can use it. I initially signed up for Code Crafters, so you can see that I'm not just talking about the site, but I do want to work with it a bit more. And that's because it's got different languages too. So it's got your Rust, it's got your Go, and it's got your Python. Those are the popular ones, but then they have other things. So there's our C Sharp, Ruby, PHP. You can see Kotlin and Java, Elixir, some of the languages that you probably hear at other events. So that's what I like about this, is that there are different languages. So if there's a language that you use every day that you want to sharpen your skills on, go for it. But if there's a language there that you aren't familiar with but have wanted to learn, they allow for that as well. My goal is either Rust or Go, but I need like 96-hour days before I have enough time to actually pick up another language. So, not yet. But after we get all that practicing in, so after we deal with katas or building our own personal projects or going through code crafters and learning something a little more challenging, after we practice it, we want to use it. It's our natural inclination. At least I would hope so. Otherwise, why are you learning it? So how do we use it? So I want to talk about contributing to open source. I know some people get nervous about contributing to open source. They're like, oh no, people are going to judge me for my code. And I have to remind you, you are not your code. So separate that right there. And then the other thing that people worry about with open source is if I contribute to open source and I put in a pull request, it's going to get immediately rejected. And I have to talk to people like, hold up, let's talk about why. Why do you think that? Because you'll learn when you contribute to open source, it doesn't have to be scary. You get the right maintainers there who welcome you into the projects. That makes a world of difference. If they have a contributing doc that explains how their processes work, that makes life a lot easier as well. So one of the ways you can put your practice to actual work is contributing to open source. Now, open source doesn't have to be just like coding for adding features or adding enhancements. You can fix bugs. If you ever go to a GitHub repo and you see issues or some issues there that you can help make sense of, go for it. There was a issue I saw in a Microsoft repo for data frames in C#, and I was like, hold up. I see what's going on. It's a problem with data inferencing, and it was only inferencing, I think, like 10 rows instead of what the person was expecting. But I knew what they were looking at and what they were looking for because that concept applied in Python and data science and inferring things. So that's how I knew how that worked there, that I could solve that issue over there. But with open source, there's so much you can do. So you can help with code reviews. If you happen to be somebody who's good at managing a project management is huge for open source. There are some people who will create their open source project, but they're not good at project management. So now they have this wall of issues and they don't know how to triage it. They don't know how to prioritize it. And so you have to deal with that. If you've got that skill set, please volunteer if you can. You can improve CI/CD pipelines too. There have been open source projects where I've looked at them and I went, it's missing something, but I don't know what. And later after the fact, I realized it's CI/CD. Definitely can help with improving UX. I'm trying to see if I put it on this Wordle here, but the other one is that you can add to the documentation. I was at a hackathon a few years back with a bunch of other open source folks. And I was talking with them like, okay, if there's anything you need for your repositories in the open source world, what is it you need? And they said, we're looking for documenters. It's one thing to be able to use our product. It's another to be able to explain to people how to use the product and to show those examples of, okay, I have a library and you can use it and it's easy to use. And here are the examples. Like, this is hard to do. So if you know anybody who wants to help open source, contribute. Now, we're coming up on October. Today is September 25th. Yeah, September 25th, 2024. And we are actually officially in Hacktoberfest. So Hacktoberfest opened a couple days ago. If you go to their website, it's hacktoberfest.com. This has been going on for quite a while now. And what Hacktoberfest is all about. So shout out to our friends at DigitalOcean who have been behind Hacktoberfest. Hacktoberfest is a way to get involved in the open source community. I like to think of it as a celebration of open source because you have folks who want to contribute to open source, so people who want to put their coding skills to use, and then you also have people who need help. So you have the maintainers. And with Hacktoberfest, you can go into your favorite GitHub repos, see if there are issues. If you're new to the whole open source thing and are nervous about it, look for things that are like good for first Good for first timers, or just better yet, look for that Hacktoberfest tag or label. So Hacktoberfest allows you to contribute. If you go to hacktoberfest.com, they'll be able to tell you if there are any rewards. Some years they have a t-shirt for those who get, I think it's 5 PRs that are accepted within the time period. So there's definitely a physical reward involved in that. Now, these are things that we're involved with here at NimblePros. So these are some repos that we'll love to share that if you want to contribute to Hacktoberfest, please do. Disclaimer, I am probably not on any of their review teams. So I myself am not going to be reviewing the PR, but yeah. So our Dallas Guard clauses is our #1 open source project that we deal with here. And it's currently as of last night. So I updated these slides last night. I didn't want to look at it this morning and try to rush slides right before the presentation, but we were at 21.2 million downloads of our Dallas Guard clauses with an average of about 8,300 per day. So we're talking, this is used very heavily, but he's looking for, I think most of his issues, and all of these are going to be something around documentation or examples. Matt, do you have a question?
Nope. I
Okay.
just did the open mouth emoji.
As I
When you
saw,
said
yeah,
21 million.
21.2 million is a lot. 8,300 downloads per day. That's quite a bit. I couldn't imagine having to support all the users and all these downloads. There's rest assured, there are a bunch of us here at Nimble Pros, and so there's a lot of people who can help with that. But still, with it being open source, it's not just a Nimble Pros thing, it's a community thing. So definitely worth checking out. What the guard clauses, think of it is you can check a situation to see if something is null or empty and get out early rather than having to do a late check in a method. So guard clauses are great for that. Our Dallas Start Smart Enum is the second one at 10.5 million downloads as of yesterday. Also another one, thousands per day average at about 4,200 per day. So this is making enumerators a little bit easier to work with in C#. Specification. So specification is our third most popular one. And so again, these are all under the Ardalis repositories. When it comes to Hacktoberfest, consider submitting to that. I have submitted to a couple of them, and the review processes have been pretty easy. The other people who he has helping him with review, easy to work with. And if they have questions, they're good about asking questions in the PR. So, but yeah, our Dallas specification allows us to do some using that specification pattern to query our collections. And it's also testable, which makes life a lot easier for that. That's as of yesterday, it was at 7 million downloads and about 2,900 downloads per day. And then the last one of the Ardalis packages that are pretty popular in NuGet is Ardalis Result. And it's 2.9 million downloads as of yesterday and about 1,800 downloads per day. So these are packages that are open. They're open source. They're open for contributors. As part of Hacktoberfest, they do have some things tagged as Hacktoberfest, so you can contribute. But if it is an issue that you want to work on for Hacktoberfest, ask the organizers if they could tag it for Hacktoberfest so that you get the credit as well. So again, Hacktoberfest, which is hacktoberfest.com, which is in the list of links for our thank you email, will get you more details on contributing to these particular repos, in addition to just going to Hacktoberfest and participate. Now, if you're watching this and you are a maintainer, the hacktoberfest.com website does have a section on there for maintainers and how you can prepare your repos for Hacktoberfest and the contributions. So that's something to consider as well. All right, so how do you put your practice to use? How do you actually use the skills? One thing we said was contributing to open source. Let's talk about another way we can do that, which is getting involved in our communities. Have you heard of Give Camps?
I have not.
So Give Camps, Give Back Hack are ways that we can give our time and resources and energies to local communities Give Back Hack, I thought I saw on their website, there's an event coming up in Columbus, Ohio in November. Give Camp Seattle Give Camp is happening next weekend. So October like 3rd and 4th or 4th and 5th, something along those lines. But basically you come together as a community, donate your time, donate your skills to help nonprofits and getting something from the community. Usually it's a website and it's been most commonly WordPress sites, but there are also other ways to help as well. We have developers, designers, project managers, testers, you name it, we put the skills to use. Photographers, things like that. So if you go to givecamp.org or givebackhack.org, these are two different events that you can just donate your time and donate your skills to help your local communities. Another thing that I was trying to put on this slide, but couldn't find a good logo for, is if you look up civic hacking. So the concept of civic hacking allows you to help your local cities and put your skills to work that way. All right. Let's look at, so you can do that. You can also participate in hackathons. Have you participated in a hackathon before?
No.
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 So I have all sorts of hackathon stories to share, but the one I want to feature first is going to be the International Space Apps Challenge by NASA. And the reason why I'm featuring that is because I used to be the lead organizer for the Cleveland location until COVID hit. And then after the pandemic started, I haven't gone back and organizing it, but they do have both in-person locations and virtual locations, and this is throughout the world, hence the international. But what's cool about it is that NASA proposes usually it's about 30 to 40 different problems out there in NASA's world. It's not necessarily all space, like completely space. There might be things like, okay, we want to build a habitat. What would that look like? Or we want to have clean drinking water. What does that look like? So there's a variety of topics out there and a variety of walks of life. It's a great way to meet the community. It's a great way to see how you might be able to apply your skills for the NASA challenges. Some locations have award ceremonies. Some locations have prizes depending on their sponsors as well. But then the local hackathons will nominate people to go to the global judging, and then global judging has their own rewards as well. So I like this one in particular because I've seen how they run the event at a global scale and how much they're to encourage communities to learn from each other and from all walks of life. But then I also have to give a shout out to our local one in the Cleveland area and to NASA Glenn Research Center because they made it easy for us to host the event. They were great hosts. And so being able to be on premises at NASA to work with NASA engineers who volunteered their time for the weekend was just fantastic. So hackathons, devpost.com is the key URL for the slide for most of these, with the exception of Space Apps, because Space Apps wasn't listed on there. But these other hackathons are, and they're just ways for you to put your coding to use to help others for good. So this is Opportunity Hacks, or ohack.dev, which is out of Arizona, I believe. Or Hacks for Humanity is also out there. MLH here. So MLH is Major League Hacking. They're the hackathons organization to watch out for people who really want to put their skills to use in hacking, in not hacking like cybersecurity, but hacking as in like coding. This is the GHW is their Global Hack Week, and the theme this one is open source. So this particular hackathon, the Twitch Streamer Tools Hackathon, the Microsoft Fabric and AI Learning Hackathon, plus these two here, Opportunity Hacks and Hacks for Humanity, are all listed on DevPost. So I feel like I want to put my coding to use for the communities, but I don't know necessarily where to find them. The first place I send people is to devpost.com because it's a good way to find various communities out there. The other thing I love about devpost.com is that they have hackathons for students as well. So if you have any students in your life who are getting into coding, And we're talking, some of these are for ages 13 to 18, so they're very much age restricted. But it's so cool the things that they cover in there. So yeah, that's where hackathons come into play. Oh, what about competing against other coders?
Just at work.
Just at work? As I have some teammates who get involved in this. For me, I like to code for fun. And if I had to focus on competing, it would be just too much. I'd be like, all right, this is now turning into a really serious, boring hobby, and I need to have fun with it. Uh, I don't have fun with competing. But Hacker Rank and Code and Game and Leak Code all have their different contests. I believe most of them is just for the glory of being at the top of the leaderboard, but double check because sometimes the competes also have prizes. The competes and the hackathons are things to look into. All right. The other thing I want to point out when it comes to putting your skills to use is sharing that with others. And so how can you share it with others? Well, think about it this way. You remember earlier when I asked, how do you learn? And I asked about, well, do you read blogs? Do you watch videos? Do you go through tutorials? As you're learning these things, consider maybe sharing them with others. And I have to point out that sometimes you have to have a selfish approach to things. And that is usually my intentions when I'm blogging, whether I'm blogging for work or blogging for personal. If I'm blogging, it's probably I encountered something that has got me so, I call it angry blogging. It's usually angry blogging, irritated blogging, where I just get so frustrated working on the problem and I don't know how to solve it. And when I have that aha moment, that's when I'm like, okay, I got to blog about this. Because future me will go through the same kind of issue later on, guaranteed. And I'll end up searching for it. And then I find the post that I wrote years back. Or I find the video where I'm like, oh, look, I actually show how I go through these steps. I can see these problems. So share your stuff with others. And when it comes to things like blogging or doing videos or writing tutorials, don't panic for perfection, shoot for good. Um, perfection, perfect is the enemy of good is what I hear often because you're always worried about, well, I gotta be very specific and I gotta be very much on task. Like you click here, then you do this, and then you do that, and then, oh no, I missed this stuff. I used to get all upset over that and be like, oh, okay, now I gotta start over. But the thing is, get out of your head and share what you learn. And don't worry, you can always go back and edit things. Editing is fine. But yeah, blog. Or maybe you have a team and you like to learn things and you do a lunch and learn and you share. For example, we do lunch and learns here where we'll talk about architecture, we'll talk about coding, we'll do lightning talks. I think lightning talks, there's lightning talks. So lightning talk, for those not familiar, you have usually about 6 minutes to talk about something, and 6 minutes goes by really quick. But we'll do lightning talks, and sometimes they're going to be on something like maybe the chain of responsibility principle, but then like somebody did a lightning talk on their solar setup. And so why they have solar for their house and solar for their cars and how they have it hooked up. But again, this goes back to you're coding something. It doesn't have to be something formal and long. It could be something short. A YouTube video or even a YouTube short. I mean, you'll see in the Nimble Pros YouTube shorts that there's ones like, oh, do you know about multi-line editing? Things like that are where I'm working on something. I'm like, you know what? I should tell other people about this. It's okay to do that. In fact, it's strongly encouraged because even if you're like, oh, nobody's going to watch us, you know who else is in that nobody's going to watch us? Future you, because future you will go back and see that. Search engines usually take future you back to current you. You can also share with others through your local user groups or meetups, and you can do this online as well. Maybe you have a conference talk. All right, so we talked about the coding sites, getting the practice, how do you put your coding to use? But what if you're like, I still want to learn more? What are other ways I can learn to be a better coder? So Nimble Pros, we work with teams. We work with dev teams often. Sometimes we're coming in there to help look at a legacy code base, for example, and convert it and modernize it. And so how do we modernize? We talk with sometimes they're the ones doing the work, but sometimes we're actually coaching dev teams and mentoring those teams and walking them through the how do you refactor your code? Or how do you get testing into this policy? Or how do you automate your delivery using CI/CD? These are all things, so you can always bring us in for that. Have you heard of the website DevBetter?
Maybe kind of sounds familiar, but
All right, so I imagine if you're reading Steve's blog or his videos, sometimes he does mention DevBetter on there. So DevBetter is a community that Steve Smith or R. Dallas runs, but it's not just him. Nimble Pros crew are also in there, and people from throughout the world are in there to become better developers. And so they have the conversations of, oh, I'm working on this technology, working on this particular project. I was thinking of doing it this way, but I don't know necessarily who to go to for questions on blah. There's all sorts of community people in the Discord bouncing ideas off of each other. There are books that we recommend to read. There's a books leaderboard. There's ways to just kind of talk with each other about like, how do you become a better coder, but also how do you become a better dev? How do you do better in interviews? How do you find jobs? How do you grow your career? How do you go from a mid-level developer to senior staff level? What does that look like? All these different things are covered in the Dev Better discussions. Steve usually does a mentoring or coaching session at least once a week, in addition to the Discord community. So if you're looking to become a better individual developer, Dev Better is definitely something to consider. Are there any questions?
I don't have any.
Let's see if there are any questions from our YouTube friends. I got a question of how we can be found on LinkedIn. So you can find Nimble Pros on LinkedIn. We are at linkedin.com/company/NimblePros. And as I am on most social media platforms, you can find me as Saduki. And so I am on there as linkedin.com/in/Saduki. If you have any questions about this, feel free also to reach out to me after the fact. If you get a thank you email from me, if I had to guess, I probably will send it here closer to 3 or 4 p.m. Eastern time today, US Eastern time. But I will send those. If you reply to that email, that will come back to me. And so rest assured, hi, there's a human at the other end. I can answer questions that way as well. And of course, if there's anything we can do to help you, if you have to do things like implement clean architecture or upgrade to .NET 8 or even with .NET 9 on the horizon, if you have issues communicating between your business and non-business teams, bring us involved. We can help you have better communications, whether it's event storming or otherwise. Modernizing legacy.NET apps, we do that often. We have clients who have web forms going to newer things. And then also if you need training for anything, so clean architecture, modular monoliths, testing. If you see it in the blog, we can probably have training for it. Or if you see it on our YouTube, we could probably have training for that as well. Just reach out to us. We'll gladly love working with you. So thank you for attending, and we'll be sending that thank you email later today.
All right, thanks.
Yep.